Hello friends, and welcome to this reflection for Maundy Thursday. There was once a young seminarian who visited an elderly priest who was known for his holiness. And this young seminarian expected that he would receive wisdom, theology, and some deep spiritual insights. So he goes to the elderly priest and asks him, "Father, I want to understand more about Jesus." The elderly priest simply said, "If you want to understand Jesus, watch how he serves at the table." The seminarian was confused. Well, he expected some big discourse on understanding Jesus. But these words were quite confusing. Watch how he serves at the table. My dear friends, these words may be confusing even for us today. But today's readings will help us to understand what that elderly priest meant by watching Jesus serve at the table. Because tonight is about three powerful symbols: the table, the towel, and the blood. So let's dive into today's first reading from the book of Exodus. And the book of Exodus takes us back to Egypt. And one can sense that the night is tense, heavy, and silent. The Israelites are slaves, but this is going to change very soon. God gives them a rather strange instruction. Take a lamb, slaughter it, put its blood on the doorpost, and eat in haste. And then comes the promise: "When I see the blood, I will pass over you." And we can probably imagine that moment where families are all inside their homes, waiting, listening, and trusting. That blood which was put on the doorpost then becomes the difference between death and life. Now, if we move forward to tonight, we see that Jesus sits at the table, but he is not just commemorating or celebrating something that happened in the past, but instead he is transforming it. Because Jesus himself becomes the lamb. He himself becomes the one that will be slaughtered and whose blood will save us. And here, the blood is not of a sacrificial animal. The blood is not of a lamb. It is by his own blood that he decides to save us. So this shows the unconditional love that he has for each one of us. The commitment, the dedication that he is willing to undergo one of the most gruesome treatments that can ever be given to any human being. In today's second reading, St. Paul tells us through his first letter to the Corinthians about what happened at that table that night. So Jesus says, "This is my body, this is my blood. Do this in memory of me." My dear friends, what we see today is not just a meal. What happened at the Last Supper is not just a symbolism, but it is truly a self-gift. There was once a family that was going through some difficult financial situation, and the mother often skipped meals for days. And she did it so that her children could have enough to eat. When the children finally found out that their mother was not eating but keeping the meals for themselves, they asked her, "Why didn't you tell us that you were hungry?" And she smiled and said, "Because your fullness is my joy." My dear friends, that is the message of the Eucharist. Jesus tells us, "I give myself so that you may live. And therefore, this also would change how we attend the daily Eucharist, because the daily Eucharist, or every Mass for that matter, is not just a repetition, but it is a reliving of that love. The table becomes an altar, bread becomes presence, and wine becomes sacrifice. We now move to today's Gospel passage, and we see that just as the disciples are absorbing all this, what Jesus has said, this is my body, this is my blood, Jesus does something rather shocking. He stands up, removes his outer garment, takes a towel, and he begins to wash their feet. This is unthinkable, because in that culture, it was only the slaves who would wash the feet of the master or of the guests. And therefore, Peter reacts exactly as any other Israelite would do. He tells them, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" In other words, are you going to do something that is meant for a slave? And my dear friends, how does Jesus react? Jesus continues to do what he was meant to do. If we are to put this scene in today's modern world, it would be like a CEO of a big company visiting the office, but instead of giving orders, he goes straight to the restroom, takes up a mop, and starts cleaning the floor. And probably you can expect the reaction from the employees. They would be shell-shocked and stunned. Some would be uncomfortable, some would be embarrassed, whereas some would also resist. And that is what Jesus is doing today. He is redefining greatness. Now, today's Gospel passage begins with a very powerful line. Having loved his own, he loved them to the end. And therefore, my dear friends, to the end is very important, because it means completely, totally, and without holding anything back, which is rather strange in today's world, because when we think of doing something, we always think first of ourselves and then we think of others. And therefore, here, my dear friends, Jesus gives us yet another example. So Jesus does this even after fully knowing that Judas will betray him, Peter will deny him, and others will abandon him. But still he washes their feet. There was once a nurse in a hospital who was caring for a rather difficult patient. Now this patient was rude, ungrateful, and constantly complaining. He would just throw things around, make a cleanup, and shout abuses at her. But we see that this nurse kept on caring for him as if he was just another patient. And one day a colleague asked her, "Why are you so kind to this patient?" And this nurse replied, "Because I am not serving him for who he is, but I am doing what I am called to do." That is the message of today. Doing what we are called to do. Jesus did what he was called to do. He invites us to do what we are called to do. And at the end, Jesus says, "I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you." And this is the heart of tonight's message. Not just to admire, but to imitate. So therefore, we can ask ourselves the question, will we come to the table but refuse the towel? Will we receive his body but not give out our own in service? Will we accept his love but not pass it on? Because you cannot separate these things. The Eucharist and service are one. And therefore, my dear friends, tonight we remember three things. We remember the blood, which is symbolic of the love that saves. We remember the table, which is symbolic of the love that nourishes, and we remember the towel, which is symbolic of the love that serves. And therefore, as we leave today's Eucharistic celebration, we can probably think about forgiving someone whom we have found difficult to forgive. We can maybe help someone quietly, and we can probably serve without the desire of being recognized or appreciated. It is only when we do these things that Holy Thursday or Maundy Thursday becomes a reality. Amen.